Hi, friends. So happy that I could be with you. I've have great memories of previous times of being with the Progressive Christian Network, and I'm honored to be able to share with you remotely about my most recent book, Life After Doom: Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart. And I would like to share my screen with you. There we go. And I should say, I know the cover is different for the UK version of the book. A lot of people have asked me why I would write a book with this title at this time, and I think, like a lot of people, I have felt over recent years that our continual failure to come together as a global civilization to address a global civilizational problem of ecological overshoot and climate change, that this failure was going to eventually sink into the nervous systems of people around the world. I felt it sinking into my nervous system. And and over the last couple of years, as the uh, the 1.5 degrees Celsius ceiling that we had set as we approached it and then went beyond it. Some people think we might be able to dip back below it, but it just struck me that I was sure that many other people were feeling what I was feeling. And that was this, what I call doom. I don't mean the sense of absolute hopelessness, but this psychological experience. I refer to it in the book as a pre-traumatic stress disorder, the sense that things are not turning out well, that we're not rising to the occasion, the sense that we need to turn together and work together, but we might turn apart. Or to say it differently, the way we turn together might be to turn on each other at a time when we need to turn toward each other and with each other to face our challenges together. And so that is really the background for this book. And in many ways, like a lot of my books, I went into this knowing there was a problem, not knowing what I needed to say about it. And in the course of writing the book, I felt that I should structure it around something, this familiar U-shaped process, a process of descent, hitting bottom, and then resilience and new possibilities. Um, and when I'm using this U-shaped journey, of course, I'm evoking the dark night of the soul and Christian spirituality. I'm evoking uh, death, burial, resurrection. I'm evoking all of those deep uh, journeys. Um, but I'm feeling them very much in relationship to our current situation uh, on our planet. And so I'd like to shape our four sessions around these four movements. I'm not going to try to summarize the whole book in 10 or 15 minutes for each of these sessions, but I'm going to try to give you a sense of each of the four movements. And we'll start with letting go, this first descent, dropping our defenses against a reality we didn't ask for. I should tell you, when I began writing this book, I was committed to writing the book, but I felt all kinds of defenses arising within me. Uh, I watched my own nervous system react in very intense ways to what I was exposing myself to. Uh, Here's how I said in the book: doom is a kind of pre traumatic stress disorder that arises when our old normal is deteriorating and no new normal has come into view. For our purposes, it isn't a single catastrophic event at some point in the future. Instead, it's the emotional and intellectual experience shared by all who realize the dangerous future into which we are presently plunging ourselves, our descendants, and our fellow creatures. Life after doom is for everyone who has reached a point where not facing their unpeaceful, uneasy, unwanted feelings about the future has become more draining than facing them. It is for anyone who understands that we've entered a dangerous time and we need to prepare ourselves to face that danger with wisdom, courage, character, and compassion. Now, there's a term I use frequently in the book, and I introduce it in this first section. It's just this highly technical term, our current situation. A lot of people are using a term like multi-crisis or polycrisis, the idea that we don't just have one problem. For a lot of people, climate change is the one problem, and I understand why. It's a really big one. But we start to understand that our problems are interrelated. And each problem makes the other problems harder to solve. So we could say our first and maybe deepest problem is how we live with the planet. Our relationship with the planet is dysfunctional. We could say we live in an overshoot relationship with the planet. We're sucking out more resources than the planet can replenish, and we're pumping out more wastes than the planet can detoxify. Uh, to use Darwinian terms, we are not fit with our environment. We do not fit in a sustainable way with our environment. Um, and this relationship, of which climate change is one very obvious and significant symptom, this relationship means that every generation we pass on to our children an earth that is slightly impoverished or very much impoverished from the world that we inherited. So every generation is inheriting an impoverished planet. Now, you might say, well, how do we deal with that? Well, that's the realm of politics. That's our second element of this multi-crisis. Normally, we use our politics to make peace and to address problems. Imperfectly, but at least that's our goal. But now we're conducting our politics with levels of hostility, polarization, paralysis, weapons of mass distraction, and authoritarianism that make it harder for us to come together globally to address the problem of overshoot. And meanwhile, the more we experience the consequences of ecological overshoot, that destabilizes our politics and increases the hostility and polarization and so on. Now, on a deeper level, how do we distribute power to engage in our politics? And we look around our world and we realize that we, in many ways, even though we have democracies in place, there are oligarchies that control our democracies, plutocracies, rule of a very small number of super rich people who very often use their money first to pay politicians directly, to buy their support, to own those politicians, but also then indirectly. I know it's hard to imagine a world where some of the world's richest people buy cable news stations and buy social media platforms and own large numbers of print media so that they can amplify their voices and the voices of their sycophants and friends, so that they will influence public opinion so that the public will elect politicians who pass the policies that the oligarchs and plutocrats and kleptocrats want to have in power. And meanwhile, they're working, those hyper wealthy elites are working on a definition of profit that rules the world. And profit is individually hoarded wealth. And hoarded wealth is the conversion of nature in two forms. First, the planet itself, and human beings' labor, who get their power to do work from eating and drinking and in other ways making use of the planet's resources. So what we've defined profit as is exploiting the earth and human labor so that we can make wealth that individuals can hoard and amass as quickly as possible without concern for the long-term well-being of the planet. Now, you put that in that issue of profit into play with power and politics and the condition of the planet. And then let's just add one more. We could add many more, but let's just add one more. How do we shape purpose or meaning for our lives? Normally, it's our religious systems and our cultural systems that produce purpose and meaning, that to shape and define purpose and meaning. But when the same plutocrats that control our politics also have an oversized impact and influence through their donations on our religious leaders, it's no surprise that our religious systems would not rise to the occasion as we might wish they would to help us deal with our current situation. You put those pieces together, you just see that with even a small amount of clarity. And that brings you to a condition where you understand that we humans don't have an ecological problem. The earth has a problem. And it's not a problem with human beings. Human beings lived in a healthy relationship with the earth for over 200,000 years. But we've developed a civilization that does not know how to live well with the planet and does not know how to live well, particularly with itself and its fellow humans. That means that we're in this double threat right now. We know that we have this ecological crisis out there, the threat of ecological collapse. You in the UK have this probably a greater understanding than people on my side of the Atlantic of what happens if the Atlantic Ocean current that helps, it's sort of the air conditioning system for the earth. If that current were to break down and there are signs that it's weakening, you have a sense of the catastrophe that would bring to the UK and Europe. And there's so many other layers of ecological collapse that we're all becoming increasingly aware of. But when you dig into studying these matters more deeply, you realize that a small ecological disturbance will create a huge civilizational disturbance. And before the ecology totally collapses, it could lead our civilization, our economic systems, our political systems, it could push them past their breaking point. Now, it turns out there's a whole huge literature of people who've been studying how civilizations grow and sustain and then unravel. You might think of it like this. When civilizations grow, their growth creates problems. When they solve those problems, they keep growing. That's why civilizations often have kind of stair-step growth process. Some problems eventually cost more to solve than the civilization can afford. And some problems may just prove to be unsolvable at any reasonable price. And the problems that arise may be internal or external. And when a civilization can no longer solve the problems it faces, it stops growing and eventually declines. Its population decreases either suddenly or more often in a kind of stair-step fashion, and the civilization begins to unravel. It declines in cohesion and wealth and power and complexity. So in the book, I structure this book around four possible scenarios. How will we respond to our current crisis of overshoot? One is we might find a way to avoid it. That's collapse avoidance. We might find a way we will collapse, have some level of collapse, but before things get too bad, we will have a rebirth. We'll learn some of our lessons and we'll be reborn in some more sustainable way. Maybe as we begin to experience collapse, we will not respond in a healthy way. We'll respond in unhealthy ways that plunge us to a level where some number of us will survive, but not at the level of that we might call civilization. And then the worst case scenario is that on our way down, we engage in nuclear, biological, chemical warfare. We accelerate our destructive tendencies, and we could lead to our own extinction as well as the extinction of some significant percentage of life on Earth. Four possible scenarios. Now, I notice that my brain, when I face these, wants to latch onto collapse avoidance. And I don't even want to admit the possibility that collapse avoidance wouldn't work. It reminds me of what the philosopher Slavoj Žižek said: we can more easily imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So we want to keep the machinery going. But then I noticed that if I can't imagine keeping the machinery going, I imagine total extinction. And one of the reasons I wanted to identify four scenarios is because our brains, I think, want to either fold toward everything will be fine or everything is hopeless and it's too late. And I've noticed that both of those scenarios have a certain self fulfilling prophecy in a negative direction. If we act as if everything's going to be fine, then we won't take the actions needed and it will make it less likely that things will be fine. And if we say it's hopeless, why even try? Then we will behave in such a way that leads to the least desirable uh, results. Letting go is dropping our defenses against a reality we didn't ask for. And I'm pretty sure that for many of you, right about now, you feel 1,000 defenses rising up in you. You don't want to even think about this subject. So the first 6 chapters of the book were my attempt to help people go. I know they're going to have these resistance. I have them. I think they're built into the way our brains work. So I structured these 6 chapters in the letting go process. I'm waking up, giving myself permission to not accept this today, to let it be a process of trying to face more reality than I've ever faced before, welcoming reality, minding my mind, paying attention to the way my mind will work against me, actually accepting reality. Fourth, send in the poets. That's let the poets help us grieve. Let the poets help us feel our feelings that are uncomfortable and difficult. When the story does harm, step away. Begin to face the stories that have brought us into the mess that we're in, stories that have shaped us and that many of us, maybe all of us, still buy into. And then to face the complexity of hope. I'm all for hope, but hope is complex, and there are ways that hope can actually undermine our full coming to terms with our situation. So that's the letting go process. It's intense, as you can feel. And I'll just propose a few questions that you all might want to think about as you're gathered for this retreat. How might progressive Christians respond to a reality we didn't ask for? How might more conservative Christians respond to this reality we didn't ask for? How might a group like PCN help people drop their defenses and enter a healthy letting go process, letting go of our resistance to realities we didn't ask for? And what spiritual resources, spiritual understandings, or practices might help us face reality in a constructive way? I hope those questions will be helpful. And I hope this process, this picture of a path of descent might be helpful to you in your engagement with our current situation. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'll look forward to our next installment of this conversation.